Hi, my name's David Sellinger, and I wanted to share some of the analysis that I've done with a group of other statisticians to understand one of the biggest claims I've seen about COVID has been from a guy named Michael Mina. He's been on CNN and Good Morning America and a bunch of other stuff, and has said that, hey, I think that this idea of using rapid testing could all by itself, even without the vaccine, end the pandemic. And he made pretty wild claims that like it could end in under 45 days. And so I took a look at his research that he's been doing. He's a professor at Harvard. And I thought to myself, gosh, this actually looks pretty good. The thing that he's missing is a visualization and a way to kind of model how this test would kind of roll its way through the population. And so, working with a group of other statisticians, we put together a couple of different simulations, and I just wanted to talk about them. So, I'm going to share my screen here and talk about what it is that Dr. Mina has been promoting. So he has been telling the world that if people use this type of test called a rapid antigen test, that we can use that to change the course of this pandemic. In fact, not only that, because it's such a low cost, high speed test, we can actually use it to prevent future pandemics. So it's a pretty amazing thing that he's claiming. And so what we did was we built a simulation model that takes into account all the different variables of an antigen test. So an antigen test is different from the type of test that you get if you gotta go to a lab and you get what's called a PCR test. And the PCR test is kind of the golden standard. It's what the CDC has. In fact, because the antigen test is different, it's actually gotten some bad press. So here's a story that Abbott was on the defense, detailed that it's embattled test results, and they claim these very low numbers of accuracy and some of these things. But then when you go and you actually read the details, what I saw that was really inspiring and interesting to me was that among the patients that are actually contagious, it performs incredibly well. In fact, here in this paragraph here, it says ID now had a sensitivity of 95% and a specificity of 97.9. And there was one test that kind of threw everything sideways. And that one test said that it had a sensitivity of 79.8%, which is obviously not what you want. You really want a higher one. In fact, we'll show you that actually doesn't drive everything in this, but nonetheless, you'd like to have something higher. What we found, though, was that a lot of the samples, most of the samples came from people who presented with symptoms more than 7 days ago. And what we know about the distribution of this disease is that, and this is from Dr. Mina's website, that when you're more than 7 days after you've started showing symptoms, you're actually really not very contagious. And so you're testing, and yes, a PCR test would come back positive, which is the standard that the CDC uses, but you're testing positive that you had it and you were contagious. There's nothing that you could actually do to change the course of your behavior other than maybe contact tracing at that point. And so Dr. Mina has basically claimed that by using these tests, these antigen tests, which are 95+% accurate during the time period when people are contagious, that we could stop the pandemic. And so what I want to do first and foremost is just kind of show a visualization. So what we did was we built a tool that has the bouncing balls. Each of these balls represents a person. If they're blue, that means they haven't gotten the disease yet. If they're yellow, they've been exposed, they're not yet infected. If they're red, they're infected and they're contagious. If they're green, they were contagious at some point and are no longer contagious. And we're going to start with, just again, for the purpose of this little visualization, 300 people, 3% of them are infected right now, which is much higher than we have really anywhere. But we use that just for visualization because otherwise, it looks silly. And to kind of illustrate the point, then every person, every one of the dots here is going to execute this antigen test that is only accurate in that one time period, and they're going to take a test every 3 days. And instead of this test going to the government having to do something, or going to a lab and then the results coming back 24, 36, 48, 72 hours later, the person gets the test and they get the results within 15 minutes, and then they can self-isolate. They can change their own behavior. And interestingly enough, we also make it so that you can only make some percentage of the population testing. I'm going to start out with 100%. Let's just start out with 100% and show if 100% of people test every 3 days, what happens? So we'll run the simulation. Everybody tests. The people that were contagious find out very, very quickly. And the total number of people that got sick was 19 out of 300. So it stopped it almost immediately. We can do that again. And there's a bunch of random variables and there's statistical probabilities in the backside of this. But what's amazing about this is that you're stopping the spread. Here's the kind of the spread of the disease. Now let's just for fun, let's set this to 0. It's not very fun, actually, to be honest with you, but just to kind of illustrate the point here is that with no rapid testing, with no controls, you hit this thing that people talk about called herd immunity. And you see the number of people that totally get infected is way over 50%. In fact, it's about 60% before the disease kind of trickles out because people aren't bumping into each other. And again, we made this as a visual tool so that you can kind of play around it. You can say, what if? The powerful thing, again, about rapid testing is it's immediate results. It's within 15 minutes. It's very, very low cost. And the most powerful thing being that if we take a population and we say 60% of the people test every 3 days, 60% of people test every 3 days, what does that curve look like? Now, remember, if nobody's testing, that curve hits 60% before the disease kind of peters out on its own. With 60% of the population testing, which is at a cost of between $5 and $25 a test, it's a lot, but it's actually not anywhere near the $1.9 trillion that we're planning on spending on the pandemic. It's actually kind of measurable in the order of tens of billions of dollars. And so instead of spending $1.9 trillion to end this pandemic over the course of 6 months plus, we could instead spend $10 billion over the course of 45 days and end this. Now, this is a neat visualization. What we realized as well, though, and here's a little Easter egg in case you're interested, push that button, but I'm not going to push it right now. But to prove the point on bigger numbers, we also made, and this is all public on this website, moretestingmorebetter.org. It's all open source. You can see all the code. We made a simulation that you can run it on much larger populations, and we expose most of the variables that kind of control the simulation. So if you have a population, we start out here with 10,000 people, I'll make it, just for fun, I'll make it 1 million people. So it's a, like real statistical simulation. You can change the shape of the disease. You can change how infectious it is. You can change how many people you're contacting. You can change all those different things and then run the simulation. And the simulation then generates, oh no, oh, there we go. I paused it, sorry. It's too many people, I forgot about that. So here we go. So since it's running 1 million, it's actually running this on your browser, and it's gonna predict how many people get the disease when we're running PCR tests and running these antigen tests. And what you're gonna see is that the same pattern occurs. Now, up here, it was with cute bouncy balls, but that's not really statistically significant. That's just to communicate the idea. Down here, this is statistically significant. This is actually simulating the behavior of 1 million people over 250 days. And we're testing, of those million people, we're testing 60% of them every 3 days, and it stops the pandemic in about 50 days. So this is exactly what Dr. Mina said. What's cool about this version of the simulation, again, there's a lot of statistics and probabilities going into the back of it, but you can kind of play with the numbers. I'm going to make the population a little bit smaller so that it will go a little bit faster. But again, let's make the population testing 0, and we'll run the simulation again, and you'll see the same thing happens. We get up into this 65% of the population has to get infected before the disease peters out. Now, this doesn't include social distancing, and so you get there pretty darn quickly, but you also get a lot of people that die. Now, if we go up to 60% again, I'll show that just for kind of a baseline. The cap in terms of the number of people that get infected is about 19% here. What's neat is that between 55% and like 80%, you have this massive impact in its ability to slow down and stop the disease. So at 70%, oopsies, did I do that wrong? Oh, I did it wrong, sorry. At 70%, that 19% becomes about 12%. 11%. At 80% of the population, that and it's dead much sooner. The disease, the pandemic ends in like 25 days. If you get 80% of the population to use these antigen tests, which are again $5 to $20 each, not huge numbers, big numbers for you and me to pay for, but not big numbers for the government. We're looking at ending it with less than 10%, 8% of the population getting sick, and the pandemic's over in like 25 days. If you can actually take this to 90%, which I think would be very, very hard logistically to do, but just to kind of play that out, we're talking about ending the pandemic in like 20 days. With less than 6% of the population getting sick. And so again, what we did was we made this tool with the intent of making it so that you can play around it. You can see, visually see and play with this thing that Dr. Mina is talking about. He's one of the smartest professors in the world on COVID, and he's been talking about this, but it's kind of a tough concept for a lot of us to grasp. And so we built this website so that you can learn more about what Dr. Mina is advocating and actually play with it and see what it means. You can test this out at a school. You can test this out in a community, because the population size, as long as everybody within that population is representing, that 60% that's testing or 70% that's testing, even a porous population like a city where you have people kind of coming in and out, as long as you hit those numbers, you're going to see the impact of this rapid testing approach. So again, I hope you find it interesting. Please take action. The CDC and the FDA have been kind of slow to allow this to be spread out more. And so we really need to reach out to our politicians and let them know that you want them to dig into this, because this is an important problem. And even with the vaccine on the way, the testing can accelerate the impacts of the vaccine. Not only that, because tests can be changed and modified much more quickly than a vaccine, which can take, really a year to verify, as we saw. When we're seeing all these variants or we're seeing new diseases emerging, rapid testing is probably one of the most amazing tools that we have available to us to stop this pandemic from spreading and to stop future pandemics. So please take action, educate yourself, share it with your friends, play with the tool. And then if you can, join Dr. Minas, join him, listen to what he has to say, share his speeches with your friends. Again, it's all on moretestingmorebetter.org. And any feedback you have, please feel free to send it to me. This is really important to me. It's really important to everybody that's impacted by this. Thank you, guys.